I'm Elizabeth Hunter, and I'm going to tell you about my 5th birthday. So when I was 5, the real Mickey Mouse called me on my birthday. So this was before the internet. So my experience with Disney was through the movies and then Sunday in the wonderful world of Disney. And this was also the days still of personal banking, which some of you will not remember. Hey, raise your hand if you remember the days of personal banking. That's right, in the back. I was only 5, but I've heard that what happened was that you had a banker, and you would go in person to take care of transactions because credit cards and ATMs were not what they are today. And my great aunt, my Auntie Barb, was Wayne Allwine's personal banker in Los Angeles. And Wayne voiced Mickey Mouse for over 30 years. And so she had him call me on my birthday. And I remember this moment so clearly. My father calling me into the kitchen where the phone, which was attached to the wall, was. And I put the big phone to my little tiny 5-year-old ear, and Wayne turned on his Mickey Mouse voice, and he said, "Hi, Beth, happy birthday." And it was a thunderbolt. The real Mickey calling me in my own house. And in a lot of ways, I have been chasing that feeling of the real story, a story as big as Disney coming into my world again. So one of the first ways that I chased this as not 5, and no longer as Beth, but as Elizabeth, was through Immersive Theater. So I launched a Shakespeare theater company at a restored blast furnace in Birmingham, Alabama, which feels like home to a lot of the folks who live there because it's a really important historical site called Sloss Furnaces, and all the folks there have grown up visiting it. And so I brought Shakespeare into this immersive, amazing space in full shows, in little bite-sized scenes, and that's actually my Mercutio doing the Queen Mab speech from Romeo and Juliet. And what I found was that by simply relocating these plays out of the proscenium to an immersive, familiar space that in a lot of ways is a lot more like Renaissance staging anyway, the audience felt that they had been a meaningful part of a big, important story. And they saw a familiar space in a brand new light. But live theater does not scale. And then I discovered augmented reality. And more specifically, the HoloLens. And the scale isn't there yet, obviously, for entertainment, but it will be. And what I see in AR is the ability to capture and scale what I have been chasing since my 5th birthday, to bring the story into the audience's world. And so while I was doing my PhD at Northwestern, which I just finished, and I graduate in 3 weeks, thank you, I launched a company through the university's innovation incubator, the Garage, to do exactly that. So this is a shot in lens of Bitter Wind, the Greek tragedy my company is adapting for the HoloLens. And Bitter Wind uses object recognition and gaze and spatial trigger boxes and gesture to put the user in the point of view of the grief-stricken queen of Argos, Clytemnestra, who's haunted by memories of her murdered daughter, Iphigenia. And I actually have it with me if anybody wants to try it after the talk. So while my particular work leans towards AR experiences, the central goal of this talk applies across XR. And that central goal is to point out a couple of design pitfalls and to show the value of an immersive theater perspective in designing for XR. So in general, what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is to reframe what counts as a meaningful XR experience. So as this new medium gathers its legs, I'm watching, in particular, VR kind of slide into an assumption that's very familiar to us in theater. And that assumption is that realistic spectacle automatically creates a meaningful experience. And as a medium, theater slid into this assumption 140 years ago, with Victorian stage spectacle. And because they're so fun, I'm going to show a couple of images, early images of Victorian stage spectacle. But first, I want to note that several things happened that allowed Victorian spectacle to become all the rage for a couple decades. But one in particular is going to be really familiar. And it's that the technology got small enough and fast enough that you could finally put visual and audio elements from the audience's offstage world onto the stage one-to-one, which maybe sounds familiar. So for example, this is Act 3 of The Whip. They had a live horse on the stage, trapped as a real locomotive got closer and closer and closer, and the audience could hear the locomotive, and they could smell the locomotive, and the horse is freaking out because it doesn't understand acting, and the audience is freaking out, and then just as the locomotive is about to crash into the horse trainer runs on and frees the horse, and then the locomotive crashed into the horse box right in front of the audience in the Victorian stage. And this is another one that I love. This is Midsummer Night's Dream, which is not a Victorian play, but restaged in 1900 with real grass covering the stage and real live rabbits hopping through to be the forest. And one of the actors named Bottom, the character's name was Bottom, was so enraged that the rabbits were upstaging him all the time that he snatched one of them up and then made his next entrance with the rabbit, which so enraged the rabbit that it bit him. And that was all the audience could remember. And this really fabulous trick called the Corsican trap, which was the first piece of stagecraft that allowed an actor, usually playing a ghost, to rise up through the stage floor and glide across the stage at the same time. And people went bonkers for this. They loved it. The play that it was in, The Corsican Brothers, was garbage, but they loved the trick, and it toured the country for years. People just wanted to come out and see the trick called the Corsican trap. And it's because the latest technological spectacle is awesome. People love it. And so do the immersive spectacle. Do it. People love it. But theater history can save us from reinventing this particular wheel, which is that spectacle by itself does not endure. That's why Aristotle put it last in the Poetics. I mean, it made the list. It's on the list, but it is last. And especially today when audiences are so accustomed to the next big technological trick, spectacle will not hold attention for long. So in addition to being just so expensive, spectacle to me is not even the most exciting and thrilling affordance of XR, storytelling. I mean, don't get me wrong, hell yes, I will paint with digital fire at room scale. Yes, I will do that. But that will not be strange for long. It will be normal. And that will be an awesome day when that is normal. But what thrills me about XR storytelling is that it is participatory and social. It invites the audience to be part of the story and brings the story into the audience's world. It collapses the separation of audience and actor, of viewer and story world, and recombines it all into something that feels genuinely new. And so I want to encourage XR designers to focus on creating participation first that feels meaningful and satisfying. And I have a concrete suggestion for this design goal. But first, another pitfall that theater history and my doctoral research can save us from. And that pitfall is only ever creating interactivity that asks the user to become the author. Rewrite the ending, or use our design vocabulary and characters to write your own chapters. And this design choice can be very satisfying, fantastic for some audience members, and fan fiction certainly has tapped into this impulse for a long time. But it isn't the only or even the most reliable way that we can create meaningful interactivity in XR. And that's partly because changing the story doesn't really work for brands that have a lot of attachment to the original version. And mostly, though, it's just plain hard for the average user to come up with a good story. We know this. That's why we pay professional storytellers a lot of money. And there is that special and irreplaceable magic of the authentic story. It's the real Mickey. So if we can't change the story because that messes up authenticity, how do we create interactivity that feels meaningful? To solve this paradox, my research looked at interactive and immersive productions of Shakespeare, like Sleep No More. Has anybody here seen Sleep No More? Been to Sleep No More? All right, excellent. So if you haven't, it's up now on the west side of Manhattan in a 6-story warehouse that's converted into a film noir-inspired hotel, the Hotel McKittrick. And you show up, and they give you a mask, and for 3 hours, you wander the hotel freely. And most of the rooms are covered in these hundreds and hundreds of film noir props, or witchy props, and like a private investigator's office that has dozens of files and letters and like taxidermied birds tacked to the wall, and you can examine them all. You pick them up, you touch them, you're looking for clues in this larger grand narrative that allegedly is going on in the McKittrick Hotel. Or you can spend your time running after the performers who move through the space performing these short interludes. They're all dancers. And the catch is that after each interlude, they run off in different directions, and so you have to decide who you're going to follow for your 3 hours. And sometimes a performer will pull an audience member, off into a private space, and you get your own private interlude. So there's a ton of participation and agency, but not once is there the sense that you, the audience member, can change the story. And some folks find this design frustrating. The performers don't even acknowledge your presence visually. They look past you or through you. They acknowledge their scene partners, and they'll move you out of the way, but it's as if you don't exist to them visually, except in very rare circumstances. But I offer this, even though some folks find the experience frustrating, as an alternative to study in building XR experiences that create meaningful interactivity without changing the story. Because what I found in shows like Sleep No More is that hidden economies drive the audience participation. So to create meaningful participation that preserves the original story, build a production-specific economy with rewards that are specific to that production. In the shows that I've looked at, these economies were created by 4 different kinds, distinct categories of production choices, which I don't have time to go into now, but as I mentioned, I am graduating in 3 weeks, so they are for sale. So instead, to illustrate this idea of rewards and a production-specific economy, I'm going to tell you one of my one-on-one encounters from Sleep No More. So this is one of the performers surrounded by audience members in the mask that you wear, those people who have that kind of like Bauta Carnival mask, Punchinello mask, whatever, it's a combination of all of those. And you can stand right up on the performers, you get that close to them. So one of the central rewards in Sleep No More is a performer inviting or sometimes even dragging you into one of these one-on-one interludes. And part of the larger implied Sleep No More economy involves telling your encounters to other people. And the folks who have seen Sleep No More, like we're all going to meet afterwards and talk about the things that we all saw. And you either tell them on the wiki or in person when you find another fan. So to leave time for questions, what I'll do is give you an abbreviated version of one of my one-on-ones, which isn't even my favorite, but any of these interludes is a reward, and this particular one, I think, shows nicely the larger Sleep No More economy and what some have called its opportunities for entrepreneurial participation, and how the show drives audience participation that has nothing to do, in a way that has nothing to do with changing the story. So in this interlude, which is not pictured there because they're very secretive and closely guarded with all images of their shows, but in this interlude, about halfway through the show, I wandered into the witch's lair. And Hecate, the head witch, was currently making another one of the performers, who was a young girl wearing a sweater set, cry. They were all sitting in this nightclub area, and I kind of elbowed my way to the front to watch this interlude going on. And Hecate had a little tiny vial, and she was collecting the tears of the girl who was crying. The girl was doing a great job of kind of crying on command. And then something else happened. There was a pearl necklace or a red lipstick that changed hands, and then the girl who was crying got up and ran out. It was what she had been looking for, I guess. And so some of the audience members who were there ran after her, but most of us stayed behind to see what Hecate was going to do. And she had this vial of tears, which didn't have any liquid in it, even though the girl had done a really great job of crying. There was no liquid in the vial. So she stood up, Hecate did, and held the vial out in a certain direction. And that was my clue. That's why this scene is important, because while the performers don't acknowledge your presence, they are planning their exit path. So when they're looking past you or moving you out of the way, it's like they're playing chess with you to get to the path that they have to exit through, because they have to get to their next location at a very specific time. So they're moving people out of the way. And I had found that if I watched where the performers' faces were pointed, I could plan where they were going to exit. And then I could position myself close enough to be able to follow whoever I wanted. So she held this vial of tears up in this direction, and I was like, okay, she's great. She's going in that, she's going to go over to that door that I have seen her on previous nights take an individual audience member into that door, and I was going to get into that lair and see what was in there with her. It was just, no, there were tons of people there. So I had to, so when she walked over to the door, I had to step on at least 6 other people's feet. Fortunately, I lived in New York for a long time, and so I was ready to throw my subway elbows and be the first one there. So I decided first that I would get her location tracking gaze. And so I put my arms up and adjusted my hair and moved my head, and I noticed that she noticed me. And I followed her all the way to the door. She swept her big dress around her to kind of shoo us back, but then she looked directly into the eyes of the 3 people right in front of her, and I leaned forward just a little bit so that she would notice me. And then she went into her lair and slammed the door. And then the other people who were standing around with me left. But I had seen this before, so I knew to wait. So then a couple beats later, she flung open the door and stuck out her hand like this to me and grabbed me and pulled me inside and closed the door. So the rest of the interlude is too long to tell now, but I would be glad to relate it to you later. But it basically involved this long quest of me drinking a vial of tears, which was just water, and then taking a note to the porter on the 3rd floor, and then bringing a ring back to Hecate, and then I won a kiss on my mask by way of reward, which, if you know anything about the Sleep No More economy, being branded by Hecate is a pretty big reward. So whether it is Sleep No More or one of the many shows that are up in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area, go see Immersive Theater and look for these economies and rewards. Even if they're not well done, they are a good lesson for building these kinds of economies in XR design, because they make use of spatial, multisensory, embodied live presence of the audience as a way to move through the story by moving through space. There's also a great site that lists these productions up on the screen, that the online that ends in NoPro/. And feel free to reach out to me. I'm looking for collaborations and conversations with folks who want to use XR to invite the audience into the story world and to bring the story into our world.